The Belize National Library Service and Information System is celebrating its 85th year of existence and of service to Belize. And Ms. Joy Ysaguirre was formerly the Chief Librarian of the Library Services in Belize. And so we're going to have a discussion with her about her time as leader of the library service and some of the milestones that have been achieved through her tenure within the library service. So good afternoon, Ms. Joy, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Nigel. It's a pleasure being here and having you as my host.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to work with you on this this important initiative. It's important that we speak with the people who are the unsung heroes of our country, the people who work behind the scenes to make some of our largest support systems work. And the library system is certainly one of the largest support systems in the country when it comes to education and literacy and so on. So it's important that we acknowledge that and that we have this discussion with you. So Ms. Joy, if we can start off then. It is my understanding that you became Chief Librarian back in 1992. Can you tell us about that?
Certainly, Nigel. I was appointed Chief Librarian following some very highly achieving librarians like Mr. Vernon and Miss Gibson and Mr. Bradley. So I stepped in 1992, having served a 3-year term, I think, at the University of Belize as library director, and came back to where my first love was, honestly, because that at the library was where I first started, and 1978.
Wow. You were a student then?
I was not I was actually teaching and left teaching and decided I would go into government service when I met Cecile Reyes.
Okay.
Who really spoke with me, and I thought this is interesting, and she really encouraged me, and so I applied for and got a job with the library, and that was where my career began as a librarian.
So you right away you got the experience of being a librarian through immersion, through the on the job training, no?
That's right. That is right.
Okay, so did you undertake any formal education or training in library studies?
I sure did. I was there not for very long when I applied and got access to go to the University of the West Indies, where I did the library training, and that too was extremely interesting. That was between 78 and 82.
And then you came back home?
Yes, I came back home and took up the post as librarian under Mr. Vernon, and moved through the ranks slowly, but moved through the ranks as principal librarian.
Okay. This was by this time, help us to picture where the library is. Where were you working?
Well, at that time, I think we were still a very, very much a book-based organization. I always said one thing, that I admired Mr. Vernon, because he was at that time the only trained librarian on staff.
Okay.
And was actually responsible for doing all the technical and professional work necessary at the organization during that time.
Okay.
So when I came back, it was really a joy and a pleasure to be able to work with him and to see how best we could move the library forward, both in terms of developing or pushing for other professionals to join our ranks. I should also mention that Cecile was also a trained librarian, but at that time on my return, she had left.
Okay.
And so it was only Mr. Vernon holding the fort. But it was it was really a challenge, and I think it was a challenge that I embraced.
So when you came back then, so you have two technical people working to build a library system, if you want to use that term, no?
Yeah.
What was today, I think the Belize National Library Service and Information System, as it's referred to today, wasn't always referred to as such. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right.
That's a more recent name.
It's a more recent thing. It was first the National Library Service, then the Belize National Library Service, and then eventually we moved to BNLSIS, which is the Belize National Library Service and Information System.
So what I'm getting a sense of then is that as the names changed or the reference to the library system changed, was it like, we safely say that the way the Winchell Library was conducting its business and providing services was also changing? Is that right?
That is certainly correct. As I said before, we moved very, very quickly, I think, from a book-based system to a system where we started automating the collection, where we started introducing technology into the whole runnings of the library. And this in and of itself was exciting, challenging, especially if you're trying to do it with very little funding, which was the case at the library, for the library at the time. But I must admit that we found interesting ways, and one of them, which I think I should mention, is UNESCO. UNESCO was very helpful.
Okay.
In the sense that UNESCO was at the time providing an annual training for the library, and it was connected to the University of the West Indies as well, through the Belize Library Association.
Okay.
It was also interesting in that we approached UNESCO for a consultant to help us assess the library at that time, and so that we can start looking for a way forward.
Okay.
We recognized that the only way we could start compete globally and maybe have a place in the regional as well as within Belize was to, at that time, introduce technology, introduce another way of processing the books and distributing the books and the whole aspect of access and information.
What time period is this?
Well, the latter 80s.
Okay.
And then and quickly into the 90s, we certainly did take off then indeed.
So I get the impression that once this study was done, did you develop some sort of strategic plan to move the agenda forward?
Oh, we certainly did. We went straight into a 5-year development plan, and then we started to search for funding wherever. We also found, interestingly enough, regional cooperation, because we formed a very strong relationship with the libraries in Central America, who, interestingly enough, they were at the same place as the Belize National Library Service, and so we had a connection in that regard, and interestingly enough, Sweden had made a commitment to help move the libraries in Central America forward.
Okay.
So we had a body there that was really helping us both financially and especially in terms of training.
Okay.
And the library really started to make some leaps and bounds forward once those things began to take place and that connection started to work for us, and we were working together. It's interesting how much you can do with regional cooperation.
What were some of the milestones you could recall going through during your tenure at the library? I mean, not only in your time as a chief librarian, but during your working career, what were some of the milestones, things that you would recall being excited about happening for the library?
Well, for me, the first thing that was a major, major milestone was when we got rid of that typewriter and we started getting our first computer.
So the
That was like,
typewriter went through the door.
oh, first thing. That was like a wow.
When would that have been? When was that?
That was definitely 92, 93, thereabouts. I mean, we were like, yes.
No.
And then we really started looking at how to develop the staff, because staffing was very key in the sense that we only had 5 staff that was at the level of high school and above,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody else who made up the library service was on a part-time basis.
Really?
Yes, certainly. Was on a part-time basis. It was working for hourly and sometimes other forms of wages. So it was a very key achievement to my mind when the then Minister of Education stepped in and said, what can we do to help the library? And it was like, this is what I needed to hear. And he stepped in, and what resulted from that was a critical look at the staff and how to make changes within the organization and how to improve the staff level. And it was really a step from there that, to my mind, was key and critical.
So you're talking here, this is starting in 92, 93.
Thereabouts, yes.
Thereabouts.
Mhm.
Okay. Prior to that, it would if I could recall as a young student and so on using the library, I remember using index cards and so on. Those would have been type.
Mhm. Yeah, we had those, the catalog cards that you had to
Uh-huh.
search to find what you want.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Those are no more, Nigel.
The fortunately or unfortunately, the younger generation won't remember that, no?
We still have our files, I think, somewhere in a storeroom, but yeah, they wouldn't remember that.
So when the first computer was introduced, did you then start to develop online or a computer-based database that was searchable that would allow people to use the library? Is that what you're saying?
That is exactly what I'm saying. Yes. Again, with the help from UNESCO, which was
Mm-hmm.
offering free software for management of library and information systems,
Mm-hmm.
we started to use a program by the name of CDS ISIS, and yes, that's where we started. Now we have this technology, and we now needed trained personnel. So training had to follow very quickly,
Okay.
as well as and one of the things I quickly found out, Nigel, is that technology is not cheap. So we had to find ways of developing the whole library system
Mm.
infrastructure and how best to do that. It was, to me, several milestones just came one upon the other. The building of the Leo Bradley Library, as we
Mm.
now see it, that was another key and critical milestone. Um,
Was that in the 90s?
in the 90s, yes,
I
in the
could I
90s.
think I could recall as an SJC student going by there and looking at the construction of this thing, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and then I remember when I heard it was a library. Of course, I became a regular user thereafter. I remember when I became a young teacher. When I was a young teacher at the time, I would go to the library to use the old Belize newspapers and so on to prepare for my history classes. So I have some memories of using that facility. Problem was just when it was just open, indeed.
And if there's one thing I regret about the whole thing, is that it was a turnkey operation, because we did not have much say or input into the library and
I
its
see.
design.
I see. So you sort of inherited the project, no?
We inherited the project for certain, but we were happy still. We got a library and we were happy.
When you go around the country today, I can't help but notice libraries in the districts and so on. Was it always that way, that you had libraries in the districts? And I think even in some of the bigger communities, you have libraries, no? Was it always that way? Or was that something that gradually came into existence?
It gradually came into existence. There were some libraries that were built back in the early days, like I think under Mr. Vernon's management. I think PG was one of them, and I think Orange Walk was one, and also Coruscant, and some of the others that came afterwards were Dangriga, for example, the Ignacia Carter Library, the Alanatas Library. But I must mention that Ignacia Carter Library was also pushed by Mr. Cornelius Carter, who not only gave the land, but he also gave a significant portion of the funds to build, and government placed the rest. And so we were able to put together the Ignacia Carter Library.
Really?
Yes, that's right. And it's named after his mother, in honor of her. So that's why the name is Ignacia Carter Library.
That's
So we had,
that's a story that needs to be retold indeed. That's good.
oh, definitely. And shortly following that, we also had the Alanatas Library, which was at the time. We also had developing very quickly. I think our focus, after we had more or less pushed all our branch libraries, we started to develop our community libraries. And for the most part, we were looking at least 2 or 3 community libraries a year, and sometimes less, but sometimes more. An interesting story too, and one I'd like to tell, is of a lady by the name of Mary Beisner in San Pedro, who decided that she would like to help us to put a library in San Pedro because we needed one there.
I see.
And between her and her husband, they came up with the funds to build a library, and we asked permission for us to place the library on a piece of government's property, and that was it. So several of our libraries came up in that way. Some of it came up through the efforts of the community. Others came up through interested citizens who were able to help us.
Excellent. The San Pedro Library, I think, is right on the beach, no? Near the beach, am I right?
It's right on the beach, yes.
So an excellent place to study and relax at the same time, I suppose.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
You know, it's good to hear how communities coming together to support the library system. That's something that's not well known, I think. But it's good that you're highlighting that now, no?
Oh, yeah. We have had a quite a good history of communities coming together to get the system started. A library in their community started and owned by
So when these libraries are developed, I'm just curious. Clearly you have to staff it. Clearly you have to provide books and resources there, and the management systems. Where did that support come from? Was it always government providing the operational support?
Government provided at least 60% or more of the support, sometimes 100% of the support. But we also had contributors such as CODE, the Canadian Organization for Development Overseas. They at one point, they were very active in Belize and with the libraries, and was very instrumental in helping us build several of the community libraries.
Do you recall any other milestones? You've talked about the modernization with the computer and the setting up of a online or computerized database, staff training, the building of the Leo Bradley Library, the town libraries, the community libraries. Can you think
one of the other milestones for me will be the Bookmobile. I was so happy when we made an appeal to our then minister, and he listened and helped us to get a Bookmobile in place, because one of the things that we were finding is that Belize is so spread so wide, communities, so many communities all over the country. And we could not reach all the communities that needed books or needed information support.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I will say this to also say that it is critical for us to understand that the importance of the library is that it serves mostly persons who are not able to purchase books and to access information otherwise. So for the most part, libraries are there to support the poor.
I see. That's
So
an
when we,
point.
it's a very critical point, because
Mm.
if you can afford to buy it, then you do not necessarily need the library.
Right.
But when you find yourself in a position where this is the source that my child can go and get and be equal to anyone else by being able to access the information free of cost, that is where we come in. And so we started to recognize that we could not meet the demands of all the communities that needed libraries. Yeah, and then we came up, and so we made this approach to the then minister, and he was more than willing and open. And the next thing we know, we got our funding through CAP2 for our Bookmobile.
Okay.
And he was very helpful with the Bookmobile system, pushing it, and that was something that we really felt that was a milestone. It made
Okay.
such a difference.
The I could recall, and this is just a little thing I remember vaguely. I had an uncle who used to, I call him uncle, but it's my father's cousin, but he is much older, who used to work at the library. His name was Victor Bevans.
Victor, he was
Yes.
in charge of community libraries.
Ah.
Yes, of course.
And that is what didn't
Victor.
ask the question. I could recall there was a little like a almost, those vans that look like at the post offices use,
Yeah.
those. I could recall
I can't
maybe in
remember.
the
You may
80s.
need to ask Mr. Yes, you may need to ask Mr. Vernon who donated those two vans. But yes,
Okay.
those were the first two vans that we had that acted like a bookmobile. We
Okay.
adopted them, and we were all over the country with them.
Yeah.
I remember going to PG in one time, and it was interesting. Yes.
I
Thank you for
actually,
reminding me about that.
an actual little side note, because he was a close member of our family, and I could recall as a young boy, probably still in primary school, getting to ride in that van, a van, I think it is, going through the Hummingbird, but it having trouble going over some of the hills, no? At the time, no? So that would have been in the 80s, if I remember correctly, right? It's just a vague random memory that I have, using the library and him being my uncle. I used to go to the Turton Library and
Yes, he was there. The mobile library still continues to serve the populations that do not have a community library in
mm,
place.
mm,
And sometimes we particularly try to target schools
mm,
that need the support.
mm,
So we go to those communities and we visit the schools, and we have three different routes. We have a route that goes north, we have a route that goes west,
mm-hmm.
and we have a route that goes into the Old Belize district area.
Okay. So I think that's important indeed. You made the point that people who would normally be able to access a library, much less purchase a book or even a newspaper, because of having access to ready access to it, would certainly benefit from this. Now it helps to improve the overall literacy, I think, of the populations using these library materials, no? And
That's right.
it prompts me to ask this particular question. What role does the library system play in the country's development, or what role should it play?
The key and critical role, and it's part of our mission as well, Nigel, is that we support a literate environment. Now, it's interesting because the role that traditionally we have support, which is not different from the literate environment, is in support of education, full stop. And recognizing
Mhm.
that Belize does not have, or at the time did not have, a very strong educational library system in place. The public library system played a very significant role in supporting education at basically all levels within the educational system.
Right, right,
But
right.
I want to say that it is critical that we recognize that the library also plays a very, very important function in terms of literacy.
Okay, okay.
We develop a lot of literate programs, a lot of programs based around literacy, and they are in support of the system. But what, into my mind, is often missing is that connect between education and the literacy programs that we are producing.
Do you find that the library system is to the core of collaboration with schools and the Ministry of Education and so on? I mean, over time, you find that you have that relationship where they work, the systems work hand in hand.
To some extent, we do. I think it could be more. I think it could be stronger. And I certainly think that it would be very beneficial if, for example, the support that the library offers is guided by the curriculum within the educational system.
Mm-hmm.
That the support that the library can and does offer is guided by the education policies.
That makes sense. You want an alignment. You want a system.
It needs to, yeah, the alignment has to be stronger and it has to be more critical. We cannot continue, I think, as we have in the past, guessing what might what might be needed. It is especially critical, I think, for example, if we are able to provide a stronger resource in terms of when our students take international exams,
Mm.
or as in the past, the CXC and other exams that are in place. Those things, I think, we can play a stronger role in providing information access to
Does it?
and support. Sorry.
Do you envision the library being, since you said that, do you envision the library providing that support exclusively in the physical library space, or is there an opportunity to do it remotely, virtually, online, and so on?
We are well on our way to looking at virtual support to schools and to our country.
Okay.
I mean, we still have some ways to go, but we're heading in that direction,
Mm.
and I think it can be achieved, and it will be achieved. I feel very strongly that it will be.
When I could recall, and I'm just thinking, no, as we're talking, I could recall using the library at the Bliss and asking for, I could remember one of the first books I would have read there at the upstairs of the Bliss as a young person would have been a book on the archaeological sites. I could, a blue cover book. No, it has a little profile of Alton Han, Shunantunich, and so on.
At the front.
Yeah, well, actually, let me see. I think it had the jade head on the front cover, right?
Mhm.
And then I remember using Turton Library. I remember using the Leo Bradley Library and being able to access, when I was maybe 18, 19 years old, the Clarion and billboards and so on.
Mhm.
And then all those years later, when I get to Niche, right next door, I become aware to where we are, maybe a couple buildings over, is what is called the National Heritage Library. But
Okay.
I became aware of it. I said, but wait, when did this happen? When did I asked myself, was this always the case that the National Heritage Library was here? And so maybe for people listening, what is the National Heritage Library and how did it get there in Belmopan?
Well, we started off, Nigel, as you rightly said, in the Bliss Institute, where there was a small collection that was called the National Collection. But that national collection was very key and critical because it served two purposes. Not only did it collect for the country, it also collected for what became the National Archives. Yes, right there at Bliss.
Okay.
So eventually, I believe we had the branching off of the National Archives as well as the National Collection. And the National Collection, when Bliss was moved from that location, it was moved to Leo Bradley Library. And at Leo Bradley Library, the National Collection started really growing, because as we have our students who go out and do thesis and come back in and place their collection in, the collection really grew. And so their work. And of course, our key focus then is to collect anything about Belize and by Belizeans and about Belize. So we had all that getting a big area of collection, and we realized this thing is getting bigger. So we moved it from there to the Turtle Library.
And Northfront Street.
So that we could offer more space. Northfront Street, that's correct. Recognizing that we wanted it to be center of the town and all this, but there was a danger. And the fire from the Pastor building brought that danger right to our door. I'm like, wow, I could remember being out there and I was like, not only will the Pastor building go, we are looking at the Biddles building and also the Turtle Library, which is, we have postcards that date that library at around 1892, 90 something like that. And so we are looking at a key collection that is housed there.
If the fire destroyed that, that would be the end of that.
Exactly.
And we're talking about material. When you say the National Collection, you're talking about materials on Belize, about Belize.
That's right.
Our history, so to speak.
And so we made an approach to our then minister. I have to say this, to our ministers of education have always been very, very, I found that they have always helped us in advancing the library. But at least during the time I've been there, I found them very, very supportive. And so we approached our Minister of Education then, and it was agreed that we would move the collection to Belmopan. One condition was that we had to keep a collection here, a representative collection here, where people could still access it, because of course this is the old capital. And so we moved the main collection to Belmopan for that primary purpose, the preservation aspect of it.
And that became known as the National Heritage Library, right?
Heritage Library, that's correct.
For people listening, well, what is important to remember is that the country, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, the country will one day have a much larger population, and the library, especially like the Belize Archives and National Heritage Library that has these Belize collections, are basically house the history of our country. So in 40, 50 years time, when our population is well over 1 million persons and so on, it will be important to have these things not only in one place, but in multiple places, so that in the event that something happens in one place, that it's backed up somewhere else, or you can find another copy somewhere else. The work that you are involved with is basically holding on to and keeping for future generations the country's records.
That's right. So it's extremely important that we look at it from that perspective, and that we continue to make sure that we keep in mind that it is for the future. And so we must preserve, we must collect, we must make sure that every Belizean who have done anything in Belize and about Belize, that they're represented in that library.
Very
that
good.
Their work is there for preservation.
As a woman leader in this particular field, was it always this way where we have women like yourselves leading these institutions and so on? Would you speak about the context under which you became a leader and the chief librarian? Could you speak about that and about being a woman? Was that a normal thing at that time? In 1992?
92?
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, it didn't feel abnormal to me. It was something I wanted to do. I embraced the challenge, honestly.
Very good. Very good. What challenges you found over the years? Clearly, you've overcome and you've done great work in helping to advance the library system in Belize. But what challenges did you encounter that now I'm assuming you have overcome them, you found ways around them, but what were the main challenges that you experienced?
You know, one of the challenges that I really should have mentioned is that we were is the whole aspect of technology, in a sense that we had a challenge of getting people to understand that this did not get rid of the library system as we now know it. In other words, we were being told things, well, you know, instead of us spending all this money on computers, we're spending all this money on computers. Why do we still need to have the books and other stuff like that? Why do we need to even have a library system? That became something we had to fight along the way.
I understand.
Because what we were trying to say is that books have not been taken over, it's only been merged. We are transitioning into this.
Yeah, you have to. So you were trying to mirror change and heritage at the same time. Meaning, you have an existing system that is working and that has a purpose. You're transitioning into a more modern system, but you have to straddle that line where both are available for everybody.
Both are available, and one, we still need the books. People
Yeah,
will still write.
yeah,
People will still need to read. Where are we taking this? So libraries had to change a lot of things, a lot of ways how we did business, and we had to start looking at how we can satisfy both criterias, the reading population as well as those who are advanced technologically.
And then, Ms. Joy, final question. Advice would you give for future leaders of the library system and for people interested in education on a whole? Is there any little pearl of wisdom that you'd like to share?
I think it takes a lot of thought, honestly, because I feel that for us to grow and develop, we have to become relevant. And relevant, to my mind, is understanding what is happening globally
Mm,
in every area,
mm.
and and planning, making plans to address what the needs of the library, because it will change.
The needs of the society, the needs of
The
education.
needs of the society, what are they, how are they changing, and how can the library continue to develop and address them? I think that is very, very critical in our development. We need to be able to see beyond just what is needed today and make plans for it.
All right, Ms. Joy, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nigel. I appreciate what you did too, and I must say that you took the time on behalf of the library to do this, and I really do appreciate it. Thanks for your
Yeah,
contributions.
it's certainly my pleasure because we use the library all the time. So I'm very happy to learn from the heads, no?
Yeah.
So,
You know,
thank you.
as you were saying about what people did with their Sunday afternoons, you know, one of the things people used to do for their Sunday afternoons was to go to the Bliss, borrow a book, sit with their children on the seaside and read.
Really? I didn't know that.
That used to be a tradition that was so common. I could remember my mother taking us, we all had to get our book, we all had to sit right there on the seashore,
Mm-hmm.
and you read and she would read, and it was so much fun. And if you ask people, because the library used to be open on a Sunday then, that was a pastime of Belizeans.
That's something. I wish after COVID it goes away and so on. Maybe that's something we could look after, you know, especially
Trying to bring back.
yeah, going to the especially marginalized communities and so on, and